Welcome to the Grief Bully podcast. I am your host, J.Nicole. Thank you for joining our weekly discussion around grief, mental health, and your overall personal wellness. The Grief Bully podcast will serve as a vehicle to help you navigate life's journey. Be sure to subscribe, review, and share the podcast with anyone in your life that you think it will help. Let's bully grief together. What's up, beautiful people? Welcome back to another episode of the Grief Bully podcast. I am your host, J.Nicole. Today is Monday, October the 12th. We are back in the studio, rocking and rolling for another episode. And I am not by myself today, so I am certainly looking forward to sharing my guests with you all. But before we get into that, if you have not already, please go back. Check out last week's episode. It's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, everywhere you can get your podcast. It is there. Leave a review. And most importantly, share it with someone else, right? Like, the point of this is to make sure that we grow as a community and that as many people as possible know that we are out there, know that there's a resource, a platform, and a home for their story. So definitely go and share that if you will. Also, we have the Blue Heart Text Gang. I want to make sure that I always say that. And I want to say in the beginning of the show because sometimes I trail off with such excitement and I forget to say it. But we do have the Blue Heart Text Gang. If you want to be a part of it, send a text. It goes directly to me, 856-341-9950. Again, that's 856-341-9950. What is the Blue Heart Text Gang? It is a community of folks where I'm constantly sending you messages. I'm letting you know when I'm going on Instagram Live, Facebook Live, when I want to be speaking different platforms. It just kind of keeps us in the know. And also it allows us to have direct communication if there's something on your mind, something you want to talk about or discuss. And maybe I haven't gotten back to your DM fast enough, but you can get to me directly. So again, that's 856-341-9950. Before we get into the episode, I definitely want to thank our sponsors, BetterHelp. They are an online counseling organization that allows us to have therapy from the comfort of our homes. It can be text message, video chat, phone call, whatever you feel comfortable with, they have that option for you. It is affordable, average about $65 per week. And while they do not take healthcare, they do offer financial aid. And when you use my link, trybetterhelp.com/thegriefbully, you will receive 10% off your first month. So again, that's trybetterhelp.com/thegriefbully. So again, if you're going through a tough time, anxiety, depression, just don't feel like yourself and you want someone to talk to, definitely reach out. So we are here rocking and rolling. We are episode 61. And as I mentioned before, I am not by myself today. I do have a guest, and I think she has an amazing story, a very powerful story, definitely one that is oozing and dripping in tons of resilience. And so I'm excited today to have on the show with me an author, a founder of Growing with Grieve. Her new book just came out. I'll let her tell you a little bit more about that. But I want to welcome to the show today, Autumn Toelle-Jackson. Autumn, how are you today?
I'm great. I'm so excited to be here with you.
That is awesome. See, I wanted to make sure, ladies and gentlemen, that I did not mess up Autumn's name. And so I made sure that I knew what that was. And I'm proud I did it right, correct?
You did it great. It was perfect.
Awesome. So we connected on social media, and Autumn is a listener of the Grief Bully podcast, and that really does my heart well, and is joyous when I have someone who is a listener who has followed the show or follows on social media the content that we're putting out, and they see themselves in it, and they feel a comfort level where we can have that conversation. And so I was so excited and stoked to have this opportunity to talk today, and most importantly, to allow Autumn to share her story and to move through her grief even more by coming on to the Grief Bully podcast today. So I don't want to mess up any parts of it, but what I do know is that you've had I think we could probably say difficult. You want to say difficult?
Yeah, difficult's a good way to put it.
A difficult go at it thus far, but you're still smiling. If you're watching, you see that she's still smiling and still making it happen here. So let's get into your story. I know one thing that definitely stood out to me. I'm actually just shy of 35. And so I was married 3 years ago. So I'd be about 32, kind of around the same age. And you were 31 when, unfortunately, you lost your husband. So if you don't mind, we can kind of just start there and just work our way through your story.
Okay, yeah. So my husband and I were married in 2009, and in February of 2015, we had one son that was almost 3, and we just had our second son who was 2 weeks old. And my husband was a wildland firefighter. He was an avid hunter. He spent a lot of times outdoors. I live in a rural area. He's a ranch kid, very active. And he was trying to get in a little bit better shape after, putting on the weight that I did with with the baby. And he was playing basketball. And then when he came home from playing basketball, he was going to go for a jog. And on one night in February, he went for a jog and he didn't come back. And I went and I found him, and he'd literally dropped dead on the side of the road at 30.
Ooh.
And so that was a pretty big first rust into grief.
Yeah, I want to just send my love. Of course, I know it's been some time, and it doesn't take away from how the experience was, but I will say that is certainly an experience that I can imagine how difficult that must have been for you. How do we move from that point? I mean, it seems to me that there could be so much unanswered questions. And one thing that I wanted to talk about that you mentioned in one of our conversations that I think goes kind of hand in hand with the experience of losing your husband and this being your first experience with grief kind of thrusted into it, is you mentioned the fear factors. And that's the increase in fear following a loss that is often irrational. So if I'm going to say irrational and a loss, I would definitely categorize this experience of the loss of your husband into that. So how is that? How do you begin to move through something so irrational?
I think for the first quite a while, I didn't know how. I just didn't. I just sat there with it. And at first I thought it was a hit and run. And I liked that because then there would be somebody to blame. There'd be something happened and I could understand it, but they have no idea even after an autopsy what happened. And so I never had those answers. And there was so much fear because now all of a sudden, if he could just drop dead, what about our kids? What about these other people I love? And I think I just sat in that fear a lot. And I don't know how many times I would go and just make sure people were still breathing while they were sleeping, just to give myself that comfort that they hadn't died.
That is real. That is probably to date one of the realest things that I've heard anyone say on my show, because I think it's something that a lot of people, until you go through such a traumatic loss, that you may not understand or might not be able to resonate with you because you don't know what that's like. And so I've kind of paired that too with death anxiety and something that I personally struggle with. So you're definitely speaking to my soul with that, because I have felt the same way after those losses. And so did you have to seek any type of professional help, or how were you able to put some pieces together in order to put one step in front of the other and move forward?
What really helped me was I was able to get in touch with a great organization, a national organization that puts on a retreat for widows and widows that are more in my age group, because I was 31 and a widow with 2 small kids, and our local town had a hospice. And so I didn't feel like I fit there, but I went to this retreat and I was surrounded by probably 250 other widows from all kinds of age groups and all kinds of experiences. And I was able to see that as alone as I felt, I wasn't alone. There were other people I could talk to who would understand.
That's so important, right? To just not feel alone. I think that's underestimated, the power of community. And so are you saying, I'm hearing that you were able to find strength in those numbers?
Absolutely. And it gave me somebody to talk to, I think, was a big part of it too. So I was able to make some connections and have somebody who maybe didn't understand fully, because, my grief's my own and their grief's their own, but who could relate in a way that made me feel better and made me understand that all these fears I was having weren't unusual. I wasn't completely going off my rocker.
No, that makes perfect sense. And as far as your children, if you don't mind me asking, how was that being able to explain to them? Or, I mean, I know your youngest was really, really young, so actually
Yeah.
both were fairly young. So was that difficult, or has it gotten difficult as they've gotten older?
Um, yeah. So our oldest son, it was really strange because he was always asking where his dad was. The whole time, from the time he could talk, he was always wanting to know where his dad was. And um, my husband passed away at night. And when we told him the next day, he hadn't asked for him and he never asked for him and he never really cried. It was just like he knew on some level that he was gone. And how he dealt with it was very matter of factly. And it was hard for me to deal with a little bit because I wanted him to love him. And at first it's like, oh, well, if you're not crying and dealing about this, I don't know what's wrong with you. That's what you should do. That's what you do when you grieve. And I took a while to understand that when he'd look at his dad's lunchbox and say things like, oh, that's my dad's lunchbox, but he's dead and now it's yours. That was how he was grieving. That was how he was processing things. And it's changed as he's gotten older.
Yeah, I think there's so much power in that, though, because I think as adults, we by nature, I think, complicate things.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think a part of it can be from what we know. So by having more knowledge, sometimes I think it can give you more fear of things,
Mm-hmm.
where versus the unknown is like, oh, okay, I'll take this as it is and continue on. And I can understand how that could be difficult to, want him to present differently, but then recognizing that this is his grief and how he's moving through it. So I definitely want to send you love for that. And I think it's admirable that you've been able to continue to push through, because I mean, that's pretty young. It's pretty young, early 30s to have experience that loss there. And so I know that you had a couple of other losses that were pretty consecutive. I know it was your grandfather, and then you had another very tragic loss. So I'll let you into that. I don't want to.
Okay. So about 9 months after he passed away, I got a call that my cousin, who was pretty much like my sister growing up, we did everything. She was my role model, the person, that one person that you want to be like. And if they like some certain kind of music, that's what you like. And she was that person for me. And I got a call that she was in the hospital and they didn't really know what was going on. And within the span of a few days, she was brain dead in her mid-30s also. And did end finding what had happened. She'd had a tumor on her adrenal gland that just threw everything out of whack. It threw all her hormones that could regulate her heart out of whack. And unfortunately, she passed away from complications due to that. And that was just kind of my two favorite people in the world at that point, barring my kids, within the span of 9 months, were gone.
Yeah.
And then, and so that was followed. And it's again really serious. And there were a few more answers with her, but you don't expect people that are so young to die of things. Even now, already through it once, you still don't expect it. So that was followed. So that was in September of the same year. And then the next March, I had a grandfather that passed away from cancer. And that had its own difficulties. And on this, I guess this sounds really strange to say out loud, but on some levels, it was almost refreshing because I could understand it. He was older. He had been fighting cancer for a while. And so logically, I was able to process it a little bit more, I think. And it really transformed the type of grief I felt for him compared to the other two.
Yeah, I think it's a lot to be said for that. And I think some people, you might have just set them free because they might have been wrestling with themselves and saying, hey, why can't I move through this? Why is this death was easier for me to process, and this I'm just still kind of in this entanglement, if you will. And I think that's a lot, especially when people are young. I think that's a really big thing to make clear there, that it's a possibility. That doesn't mean that you love someone less. And I think that's a part of it too. I don't want anyone to misunderstand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's not that one person means more or less, but some things are just literally easier to process. And especially because you didn't have any answers for those first two losses. Now, like you said in the beginning, you have someone to point to. You have something to say, okay, it was you, cancer, you did this,
Mhm.
versus, I mean, just the unspeakable that you've been through. I think
Yeah. It was a different experience with him. He was in the hospital. We knew he was getting ready to pass away. He has 6 kids and a bunch of grandkids, and his room was just packed full with people that when it got down to those last few hours, I stepped aside because I had been in the room when my cousin was taken off life support. And I didn't find the comfort in being there that my aunt and my mom and my sister and some other people felt when they were in that room with her. Of course, I would have never left her alone, and I was glad I could be there, but I was there more for my uncle in reality than I was for me. And when it came to my grandpa and he was surrounded by all these loved ones, I kind of said my goodbyes, and I wasn't there when he died because I didn't feel like I'd get any comfort out of it.
and that's
Um,
okay, right? That's okay
yeah.
to say, because I think I don't know. I think that that could be tough for some people to beat themselves up, including myself, where you feel guilt about how those moments were, but you also do have to make a decision for yourself and what might be best for you and able to help you and your grieving, your ability to cope. So I think it's admirable that you were able to make that decision.
Yeah, it was hard. And I did feel like some of my family members were judging me, but I knew he was surrounded by people who cared for him and loved him. And I already told him how much I cared for him and loved him. And it took me a little while to come to terms with that. But I think as I was processing the loss of my husband and the loss of my cousin and now my grandpa, I think I was learning what I needed to do for my own grief.
Did you feel yourself getting stronger over these losses? Because I was saying recently that as it got harder, I got stronger, but only because being strong was the only option that I had. So, do you feel like that you felt like you were able at some point to kind of, well, it sounds like you were, in a
Hmm.
sense of knowing what was safe and what wasn't safe for you, what was healthy and not healthy for you in terms of that. But maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah. Ugh. I always hated when people would be like, "Oh, you're so strong." I
Yeah.
mean, that was what they get. What I've come to learn now is just because I hated it when they told me that didn't mean it wasn't true. And
Mm.
just because I had no choice but to deal with these losses didn't necessarily mean I was weak. I felt weak. I felt like I was barely able to breathe. Um, but I did, as I went through them, I felt like I was able to carry that grief a little bit better. And I think it had a lot to do with me learning how to actually process it in a healthy way and not just compartmentalize it and shove it down and try to run from this big giant grief monster that's chasing me the whole time.
It does feel like a giant grief monster is chasing you sometimes, right? Just
Yeah, and
leave me alone,
and
please.
it's exhausting. And what I found was it always caught me. And through some counseling, what I learned was so let it catch you, because what happens after it catches you, you spend a few hours or a few days in a pretty horrible, miserable spot. But after that, you feel a little bit lighter and you don't have to run and you have a little bit of peace, really.
Wow, you don't have to run. And so what? Let it catch you. I love it. I love this conversation with you, Autumn. It is amazing. It's so many small things that I think we overlook that are so powerful. And I love that. And I love your grace. And so we're talking about the grief monster
Mm-hmm.
and it chasing you. It didn't stop there. It was really
No.
after you. And so,
Yeah.
oh my goodness. I mean, you would think like, well, how much can a person take?
Yeah, so that was in 2016, in March of 2016. And I got a little break for a while. I was able to, I met a man who kind of went from an acquaintance to my grief partner, who I was able to grieve with, who would talk to me about not just my grief, but about anything. And um, I don't know if you had a person where you don't have to wear your mask. You don't have to put on a smile because you don't want people to pity you or feel bad for you. And you can let your dark, inappropriate humor about stuff kind of come out. And he was that person for me. And in 2017, we got married. Um, and it was great. And in 2018, in July, we had a little beautiful girl, Rylee, who we added to our family. And for 3 months, 3.5 months, I didn't know I could be that happy again after all the loss I'd been through. And I really tried to embrace life. I didn't know what was going to happen. I still made sure my kids were breathing. Now I made sure my husband was breathing randomly. And I still worry about all that stuff, but I was really able to embrace that I have them today. And so let's make the best of today. And at the end of October 2018, we all had some colds, and Rylee wasn't eating that good, and she got dehydrated, and we took her to the hospital, and they were going to run some tests. And a fairly long story short was she ended up going into cardiac arrest when they turned her on her side before they'd even been able to run some tests. And they worked on her for 40 minutes, and they were able to get her heart going again and get her stabilized. And we went to another hospital, but it was too late, and she was considered brain dead at 3.5 months. And we were able to go through organ donation with her, and she was able to donate her heart and her liver and her kidneys. And Rylee also means courageous, so we started calling her our courageous miracle. But yeah, at that point, I remember telling a friend, it's like, I feel so cursed.
Yeah, I think that might be an accurate feeling that someone could feel. I think it's justifiable to feel that way for sure. And it's tough. It's tough. I want to find the right words, but I think for me, and I'll be honest with you, and this is definitely not a pity party. I'm not really a fan of those, but I am a fan of sitting with someone and also letting someone know when I can imagine. And when it comes to child loss, it's something that is also, it just gets to me. I'm not a parent, and I don't have children. I have 9 nieces and nephews, and they've been super close to me my entire life. And that's the one that I think could have you question your faith if you are a believer. And I think that's one that we don't talk about as much, to be honest. I think that infant loss, child loss, pregnancy loss, like I think those are all things that should get more awareness. And so at that point, Autumn, what does your hope meter look like? Like, does that even exist at this point after losing Rylee?
No, not really. I mean, at this point, I remember my current husband and I, when she was still in the hospital, it's like, how do we survive this? I mean, I couldn't see the hope at that point. It did pick up a little bit with the organ donation, which actually really surprised us. And it's something my husband and I we were both on the same page with. And we did it because we knew how horrible it was to lose a child. And we're like, well, if we know people are on these lists, and if they're waiting, maybe they don't have to go through this. And we didn't realize how much benefit we'd actually get from that knowledge that she's out there somewhere. And because of her, not only did she save 3 lives, which is more than most of us will do in our entire lifetime, but she gave all their friends, their families, that much more time with them, and going on 2 years now of more time with them. And that really started to help us kind of to pick up that hope.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. Do you know where her organs were donated to, or do you not get to know that? I mean, hopefully that's not too invasive, but I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, so we can write them. It's because of all the privacy information, it's very regulated. So we write to a coordinator who makes sure there's no too detailed of personal information in it. And then they pass that on to another coordinator who passes it on to the recipients. And then if the recipients want it. So basically they say, we have a letter for you, you can read it or not. I do think all of the recipients have read our letters. To date, only the kidney recipient has written back. And it was nice to get that letter. And at first I really tied on to that. And it's like, oh, I want these people to write back. I want to know everything about them because they have part of our little girl in them. But now I understand that they're going through their own stuff, their own crazy medical situations. And I hope one day to get to have more contact with them. If we both agree, we can start direct communication and have more of a relationship. But if not, we write every 6 months, every 10 months, and just kind of give them an update on how we're doing and how our family's doing. And the most important thing for us is that they know that we lost her, but having her donate her organs really helped save us in our grief. And we think that's important.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Thank you for feeling comfortable sharing that. And like I said, I wasn't trying to be too invasive, but I think there's a lot to be said for that part of it in the grieving process and the journey and just what that could look like. And so before we get into your book, I absolutely want to have the opportunity to actually, you know what, I do want to just get into it because the title itself, I mean, I think that kind of marches us right into where we are. So we've been through the conversation of times in your life where it could have been considered dark and darkness. And then we talked about living with it and growing and grief and now holding on to the happiness. So your book, Boldly Into the Darkness, Living with Loss, Growing with Grief. Growing with grief and holding on to happiness. So congratulations.
Thank you.
That's amazing. So just tell us a little bit about the book and because I mean, I feel like from listening to you today, a lot of people are going to want to learn more about your story and connect with you more and hopefully get a copy of your book. And so let's just talk a little bit about that and how that intertwines with your journey.
Yeah. So I love to read. So when I went through these losses, I kind of went to books and I started realizing that people's stories helped me. And I kind of thought, you know, I've been through a lot. Maybe my story can help other people. So I wrote, it's a memoir. It doesn't include my entire life, but it starts with meeting Joe and some of the main things that happened earlier in our marriage. And then it goes through the loss of Rylee. And it really talks about a lot of the stuff that I was too scared to talk about when I was actually going through it. It talks about things like, what do I do with his deodorant? I chose to wear it till I ran out, but it's like, I don't know. And that was a really stressful thing to me. It's like, I don't want to throw this away. It was a part of him. What do I do with this stuff? To going back to work. And by the time I'd get dressed and deal with kids, I was too exhausted to put on shoes. So I'd wear these slippers to work. And so it really talks about a lot of that grief that nobody wants to talk about. And then it talks a lot about my healing and what I found through counseling and through different support groups and how I applied that to my life and how I've chosen and I continue to choose because if you've been through grief, you know that you can't just choose once to be happy because you still have grief. Oh, yeah, exactly. But it's always there, right? It's always a part of you and it's just how you carry it and that it's okay to fall and it's okay to go into those places and really grieve whenever you need to. And it's not something to be ashamed of. That was a really big thing for me. And I wanted to share that with other people.
That's awesome. I think it sounds like an amazing book and a great read. And I think it'll be a very helpful resource. That's a word that I definitely hear there is it will be an absolute great resource. And in addition to anyone's life that's bereaved or non-bereaved, because I think that's also a part of it too, is to even see what someone's life could be like in terms of supporting loved ones or also when you find yourself at the grief crossroads and you have to deal with this. So thank you for sharing that. And I'll make sure we put links in our show notes so we can get our audience to be able to get a copy of that. And so I want to bounce into our Love and Memory segment. It's a part of our show that's very important to me to humanize and to say the names of some of our loved ones, some of our angels that we may not say ourselves often or other people might not say. But for here on a Griefbully podcast, it's been important to me to make sure that I do that. And so with having Autumn on the show today, our Love and Memory segment is going to go out to Joe, Brittany, and Rylee Marie. And so we want to continue to send our love and our prayers to yourself and your family, and may they continue to rest well. And you know, I'm sure that they are proud of all of the strength and everything that you're doing. So thank you for being so brave today. And
thank you.
No, absolutely. You're certainly welcome. So I want to now go into our inspirational boost. So we kind of can do that as well. And that's a part of our show where we just do a quote, or it pretty much is always a quote. And that's sponsored by Adina J Designs. They make, create, and inspire us through decorated apparel, wood signs, custom tumblers, doormats, and all that good stuff. Go follow them on Adina J Designs at ADENAJAYDESIGNS. I always say this every week, guys. Go let them know that I sent you. They may give you a discount. They might not, but closed mouths don't get fed. So definitely go check them out. Our inspirational boost this week is perfect, actually. Strength grows in the moments when you think you can't go on, but you keep going anyway. I think that's pretty much, if I was to just do a synopsis of your life, I would absolutely say it. I didn't even know, I didn't plan it. So that's really when you go on, but you can't, but you go on anyway. I think there's such power on that. What do you think about it?
Oh, I love that. I think it completely fits everything. It fits how I think people perceive those who are grieving when they can't imagine what they're going through, but also it recognizes that when you are grieving, you do feel like you can't go on. And most people do find a way somehow.
Yeah. I think if we stop and think about that ratio sometimes, I think it might give us more hope if we realize how many people are overcoming and are choosing to persevere and have sought out the resources and the strength to do so. Because there's a lot to be said for that. Because like you said, and the quote says, I remember times where I didn't think I could go on and I didn't know how I would be able to do that. But look at us here today on the podcast, chatting, talking about your wonderful book. And we're just trying to do as much as we can do for the grief community. So 2 things. I do want to give you an opportunity to just say anything that you might think would be great, an added nugget or gem, or just a few sentences of hope for the listener out there that might find themselves in your shoes or just in any similar part of the grief journey.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to remember is if you're grieving, it's okay to grieve. And our culture doesn't make us feel as comfortable, but it's okay to grieve. And if you need to cry in the middle of a supermarket, it's okay to cry in the middle of a supermarket, and you don't have to apologize to anybody for it, because you have every right to grieve and to be sad. And if you do anything else, make sure you give yourself that permission.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Unapologetically, folks, make sure you do that. So Autumn, you know that there was not going to be any chance that you were going to get out of here today without answering the question that, I want to know from all of my guests, and our audience wants to know as well. If you had to choose a color for your grief, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I love that question, and I've thought so much about it, and I don't have a simple answer, so I hope that's okay if I take a minute.
No apology needed.
I think when I think of grief, and I think of just the raw emotions of grief, to be completely uncreative, I think of black, but not like a black that we can create. I think of like that complete soul-shattering, soul-sucking blackness, complete absence of light, where it's like just so dark that you don't even know that light exists anymore. It's just this overwhelming blackness. But I think of my grief in terms of colors a lot, and I think of the colors as I heal. When my husband died and Brittany died and Rylee died, I felt my soul just like completely shatter, and each time I had to rebuild myself. And I don't know if you're familiar with kintsugi, and I probably slaughtered it, but it's
No, I'm not. So it's okay. So yes, that's the
okay.
word. Yeah.
Okay, great. I got it. Did it perfect. But it's a Japanese art, really, of repairing broken bowls or vases or dishes with gold and silver and colors, because these things that are broken can still be beautiful. And so I've always imagined my mind every time I rebuild myself from each loss as being glued with these colors. And so with Joe, for that loss, I always imagined it as being this platinum color, and Brittany was just so pure and happy, and I see her as being like a yellow sunflowery color. And with Rylee, it's just this rich purple. And so I guess I assign a grief color to each individual grief.
And you can do that unapologetically, right? That's what we do.
Exactly.
I love that. I love your answer. And I'm going to actually learn more about that because I think it's beautiful. I just started picturing, honestly, kind of how stainless glass, I mean, what is it called? In churches,
Like
the
the mosaics
yes,
or
mosaics. That's I was when as you were speaking, I
Mhm.
was literally picturing like your heart and your like as like this mosaic, like just different parts of it being put together like that beautifully.
Yeah, it's just I don't know why it's just one of those pictures that I've always really liked to see myself healing and visualize myself healing, but still carrying that loss with me in as beautiful of a way as I can.
I love it. I love it. And you've been a phenomenal guest today, Autumn. I cannot thank you enough for coming on the show and just sharing your love and your light with us is super important to continue to have these types of conversations and dialogues. And so before we get out of here, where can our audience connect with you? Where can we find you on social media, Facebook, Instagram, or any of the above?
Yeah, I've got a website called Growing with Grief, which just provides support resources. I don't really blog or anything myself, but I'm more than happy to share everybody else's blogs and podcasts and books on there. So that's growingwithgrief.com. Um, Facebook is under Growing with Grief, Instagram, it's all the same title. So you can reach out to me there, and I'm always happy to talk with people and hear their stories too.
Perfect. Thank you. And I'll make sure, like I said, that we have that in the show notes so our audience can continue to connect with you. And I myself am looking forward to continue to connect with you and build our relationship, continue to do work in this grief community together. I thank you so much again for being on the show. Guys, definitely listen, Blue Heart Gang, YouTube, reviews, all of that good stuff. You already know the drill. I'm not going to bug you with that today. I hang out the most on Instagram. You guys already know that. Definitely go follow me there at I_am_J.Nicole. Guys, till next time, you already know. Love and light. Peace.